Apache woman saved by a cowboy. A Wild West survival story. The sun rose over the Arizona desert, painting the sky in streaks of orange and gold. The land stretched endlessly, a vast expanse of dry earth, scattered rocks and tall, twisted cacti. It was beautiful in its own way, but it was also harsh, unforgiving, and dangerous. In the midst of this wilderness walked Nayeli, a young Apache woman. She was slender, strong, and alert, her long black hair braided neatly down her back. Her family had taught her from a young age how to read the land, how to find water, edible plants, and shelter. Today, however, even her skills would be tested in ways she had never imagined. Nayeli had set out before sunrise. She had gone to gather herbs for her tribe, plants used to heal wounds, soothe pain, and prevent sickness. She knew the desert well, or so she thought. The morning had begun calmly, with the cool air brushing against her skin and the chirping of distant birds filling the silence. She hummed softly to herself as she walked, scanning the ground for tiny green shoots, fragrant leaves, and any sign of the plants her people needed. She crouched often, examining the soil and small stones, making sure she collected only what was safe. As the sun climbed higher, the temperature began to rise quickly. The air shimmered with heat, and the shadows of the rocks shortened to mere slivers on the sand. Nayeli paused to drink from her small water skin, careful not to gulp too quickly. She wiped her mouth with the back of her hand and looked around. The terrain was starting to look unfamiliar. The hills, rocks, and scattered shrubs all seemed to blend together under the relentless sun. "I must be close," she whispered to herself, though doubt had begun to creep into her mind. Her heart beat a little faster. She had traveled this way many times before, but today the desert seemed different, more vast, more empty, as if it had expanded overnight. The wind rose suddenly, carrying a fine layer of dust that stung her eyes and made her cough. She shielded her face and pressed on, telling herself that she would find the herbs and then return home before the sun set. Hours passed and Nayeli's steps grew slower. Each rock she stepped over seemed heavier than the last, and the warmth of the sand under her moccasins burned her feet. The herbs she sought were nowhere in sight. Anxiety began to rise inside her like a tightening knot. She knew the desert could be merciless to anyone who lost their way, and the thought of wandering here alone was frightening. The sun reached its highest point, and the heat became nearly unbearable. Nayeli found a small shaded spot under a large rock and rested. She took a deep breath, trying to calm her racing thoughts. "I can do this," she said aloud, though her voice sounded small and fragile against the vast emptiness around her. She sipped the last of her water and set out again, moving more carefully now. She looked for any signs that could guide her, scratches on rocks, animal tracks, or the distant shapes of familiar hills, but the desert seemed endless, each view looking the same as the last. A feeling of loneliness crept over her. She had never felt so small in the world before, so vulnerable. Meanwhile, a few miles away, a man rode his horse slowly along a dusty trail. Sam Hawkins was a cowboy, rough and weathered from years of working cattle and traveling across the Wild West. His sun-bleached hat shaded his sharp eyes, which constantly scanned the horizon. Sam was not just strong, he was careful, a man who had learned to respect the land and its dangers. Today he was driving a small herd of cattle to a distant ranch. The cattle were restless, kicking up dust as they moved. Sam urged them along, his voice low and calm. He noticed a faint trail of footprints crossing his path, small, delicate prints that did not match the boots of a cowboy or the hooves of cattle. Curiosity sparked in Sam's mind. He paused and dismounted, tying his horse to a nearby cactus. He knelt to examine the prints. They were human, but smaller and lighter. He traced them with his finger, noticing the careful steps of someone who had been moving slowly, perhaps even struggling. He looked up, scanning the desert. In the distance, he saw a small figure hunched near a rock. A woman. She looked weak and tired. Sam felt a pang of concern. He had seen many travelers in trouble in the desert, and he knew how quickly conditions could turn deadly. Meanwhile, Nayeli had continued walking, her energy fading. The heat and lack of water made her legs heavy, and her head ached. She stopped again, panting and wiping sweat from her brow. She had to keep going. She could not stay in one place. If she did, she might not survive the long afternoon. But just as she was about to take another step, she stumbled over a rock and fell to her knees. Her hand scraped against the rough desert floor, and a small trickle of blood ran down her arm. She gritted her teeth, determined not to cry out. She could survive this. She had survived worse before. That was when Sam appeared from behind a rocky outcrop. His voice was calm but firm. "Hey there, are you all right?" Nayeli froze, startled by the sudden sound. Her eyes widened. She had never seen a white cowboy up close, and for a moment, fear surged through her. She clutched her arms around herself, unsure if she should run or stay. I'm fine," she whispered, her voice trembling. Sam could see that she was anything but fine. He took a careful step closer, keeping his hands visible. "You look like you need water," he said. "I've got some." He reached into his saddlebag and held out a small water skin. Nayeli hesitated. She had been taught to be cautious of strangers, but the desert had left her with little choice. Her throat was dry, and her lips cracked. Finally, she nodded and took the water skin, drinking slowly. Sam watched her carefully, understanding that trust would take time. As she drank, Nayeli looked up at him, her dark eyes meeting his. There was curiosity there, but also a spark of fear. "Where am I?" she asked softly. "You're a long way from home," Sam said gently. "You've been walking in this desert for hours. It's easy to get lost out here." Nayeli nodded silently, taking in his words. She realized that he was right. She had lost her way. The desert was not forgiving, and she was lucky to have found someone who cared enough to help. Sam offered her his hand, and after a brief moment of hesitation, Nayeli accepted it. He helped her to her feet, supporting her weight as they moved toward a shaded area under a large rock. The air was cooler here, and the shadow offered some relief from the relentless sun. Nayeli sank to the ground, exhausted, while Sam knelt beside her. He offered her more water and a small piece of jerky. She ate slowly, her energy returning little by little. They did not speak much at first. Words were not easy, and there was a language barrier, but both understood the unspoken. They were alive, and they were no longer alone. Nayeli's breathing slowed, and the tension in her muscles eased. For the first time since the morning, she allowed herself to relax. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, Sam looked around, making sure there were no immediate dangers, no snakes, no scorpions, and no hostile travelers. He knew the desert could be unforgiving. Then he turned his attention back to Nayeli. "We should find some water soon," he said, "and some shade for the rest of the day. You need to rest." Nayeli nodded, grateful for his guidance. The two of them sat quietly, the wind carrying the faint sound of distant birds and the occasional rustle of desert animals. It was a peaceful moment amidst a harsh landscape. Nayeli felt a mixture of relief and curiosity. Who was this man? Why had he stopped to help her? And most importantly, how would they survive the rest of the day in this relentless desert? Despite the uncertainty, one thing was clear: they would face it together, at least for now. And in that vast, unforgiving land, the unlikely meeting of an Apache woman and a cowboy would mark the beginning of a story neither of them would ever forget. The desert sun blazed high in the sky, casting long shadows over the uneven rocks and dry, cracked earth. Nayeli sat on the shaded side of the rock, sipping water slowly, while Sam Hawkins kept watch, scanning the horizon for danger. The wind shifted, carrying a fine layer of dust that stung their eyes, but it also brought a faint scent of something more promising, perhaps a distant stream or a hidden waterhole. Sam's sharp eyes caught the slight green shimmer among the brown and gold landscape. "We need to move," Sam said gently, his voice low and calm. Nayeli looked up, her dark eyes blinking against the sunlight. She had started to regain her strength, but still felt weak and unsteady. Her legs trembled slightly as she stood, leaning on Sam for support. "Move?" she asked softly, her voice barely audible. "Yes," Sam replied. "There's water not far from here. We can rest properly there. But we need to get going before the sun climbs too high." He pointed toward a distant line of green that cut through the desert like a thin ribbon. Nayeli nodded silently. She trusted him, even though she barely knew him. The desert had shown her its cruelty already, and she understood that staying in one place too long could be dangerous. Step by step, Sam helped her over rocks, around sharp cacti, and across sandy patches where each step threatened to slip or sink. Nayeli's small moccasins made soft impressions in the sand, almost lost among the tracks of lizards, rabbits, and the occasional coyote. The desert was alive in ways most people did not notice. Tiny creatures scuttling under rocks, birds circling above, and the constant whisper of the wind. Hours passed. The sun moved slowly across the sky, burning fiercely, and the shade of the rocks offered little relief. Nayeli's stomach growled, and she felt the dry ache in her throat grow stronger. Her energy was returning slowly, but exhaustion was still pressing down on her like a heavy weight. Sam noticed, and without words he adjusted their pace, slowing down to let her rest whenever needed. He offered small sips of water from his own supply, careful to ration it. "You're brave," he said quietly at one point as they crossed a rocky plateau. "Most people would have given up hours ago." Nayeli looked at him, surprised. She had not thought of herself as brave, just careful and determined. But his words, simple as they were, gave her a spark of courage. She nodded, grateful, and pressed on. As they walked, the desert revealed its dangers more clearly. Rocks shifted under their feet, and thorny plants scratched at their legs. A sudden gust of wind kicked up a cloud of dust, making Nayeli cough and squint. She stumbled, but Sam was quick to grab her arm, steadying her before she fell. "Careful," he said, his tone firm but gentle. "You can't afford to fall here." She took a deep breath, wiped the dust from her eyes, and continued, leaning a little on him for support. By mid-afternoon, the distant green they had spotted earlier had grown closer. Nayeli's heart lifted at the sight. The promise of water, shade, and rest gave her renewed strength. She moved more steadily now, her steps gaining confidence. Sam watched her carefully, making sure she did not overexert herself. He knew the desert was unpredictable. Exhaustion could lead to mistakes, and mistakes could be fatal. They finally reached a small canyon, where a narrow stream trickled through rocks and sand. The water was clear and cool, reflecting the sunlight in tiny, sparkling patterns. Nayeli knelt beside it, cupping her hands to drink, savoring the refreshing taste as it slid down her throat. Relief washed over her in a way words could not capture. Sam stayed nearby, keeping watch, his horse tied to a low branch nearby. He waited until she had rested enough to continue, giving her the space to recover but ready to act if needed. As Nayeli drank, she noticed the plants along the stream, herbs and small shrubs she recognized from her tribe's teachings. A sense of accomplishment mixed with relief filled her chest. She could collect what she came for and survive the day thanks to Sam's help. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice carrying gratitude more than words could show. Sam nodded, a slight smile on his sunburned face. But the desert had not finished testing them. As they rested, a distant sound carried through the canyon, a low, grating noise that sent a shiver down Nayeli's spine. Sam's ears twitched, and he immediately crouched slightly, scanning the horizon. "Outlaws," he muttered, more to himself than to her. "Could be a small gang, could be trouble for us." Nayeli froze, her mind racing. Danger had come in many forms before, but the thought of outlaws in this desolate canyon made her feel suddenly very small. "Stay behind me," Sam said, noticing her fear. He moved closer to her, forming a protective shield with his body. Nayeli followed silently, her trust in him absolute. They began to move carefully, keeping low and avoiding the open, sandy areas where they could be seen. Each step was deliberate, quiet, and slow. The rustle of leaves, the clatter of small stones, and the distant calls of birds were the only sounds around them. The outlaws appeared on a ridge above the canyon, a small group of men on horseback, dusty and worn from travel. They were armed and looked aggressive, their eyes scanning the area for easy prey. Sam studied them silently, calculating their moves. He knew confrontation could be dangerous, but so could hiding indefinitely. He decided they needed to keep moving, using the rocks and canyon walls as cover. Step by step, Sam guided Nayeli through narrow pathways and behind boulders. He pointed silently to rocks where they could hide, and she followed without hesitation. Their communication was wordless, relying on gestures, glances, and a shared understanding born from survival. Every sound, every shadow mattered. The outlaws passed by without noticing them, but the tension in the air was thick. Nayeli's heart pounded, her muscles tense, ready to react if danger came too close. Once the outlaws were out of sight, Sam allowed himself to exhale slowly. "You did well," he said quietly, giving her a small nod of approval. Nayeli managed a faint smile, her fear gradually replaced by relief. She realized how much she depended on his knowledge and strength in this harsh landscape. For the first time, she felt a sense of connection, a bond formed not by words, but by shared struggle and survival. They continued along the canyon, moving toward a wider area where the sun would not beat down so fiercely. As they walked, Nayeli began to share small bits of information about the herbs she needed and the ways her tribe used them. Sam listened carefully, fascinated by her knowledge. He had spent most of his life with cattle and horses, but the wisdom of the land she shared was something he had never experienced. It gave him a new respect for her, not just as someone he had saved, but as a guide, a teacher, and a survivor. By late afternoon, they reached a small grove of trees, a rare oasis in the desert. The shade was deep, and a gentle breeze rustled the leaves, bringing a sense of calm. Nayeli sank to the ground, exhausted but grateful. Sam helped her settle against a large tree trunk and offered more water. She drank slowly, savoring the cool liquid as if it were treasure. The grove was quiet, the sun beginning to dip toward the horizon, casting long golden shadows across the sand and rocks. As they rested, Naeli realized how much she had relied on Sam's presence. The desert had tested her courage, strength, and knowledge, and she had faced each challenge. But alone, she might not have survived the heat, the exhaustion, or the danger. With him, she felt safer, stronger, and more confident that she could reach her tribe with the herbs she had come for. Sam, too, felt a sense of satisfaction. Helping someone survive in this harsh land was always rewarding, but guiding Naeli through danger, heat, and uncertainty had a deeper meaning. He respected her bravery, her intelligence, and her patience. In the quiet of the grove, they shared a moment of understanding. Words were few, but the silence spoke volumes. As the sun dipped lower, casting the desert in warm, fading light, they began to prepare for the night. They would make a small fire for warmth and protection, careful to keep it small and controlled. Naeli gathered some dry wood while Sam kept watch. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying the faint sound of distant animals, a reminder that the desert was alive even as night approached. They shared a simple meal of jerky and water, sitting quietly by the small fire. The day had been long, exhausting, and dangerous, but it had also been a day of connection, survival, and trust. Naeli realized that the desert, while harsh and unforgiving, had brought her something unexpected, a bond with someone from a world very different from her own. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Naeli lay down near the fire, wrapped in a blanket Sam had given her. She felt safe, at least for the night. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The desert never truly rested, but for now she allowed herself a moment of peace, knowing that she was not alone. The desert night was quiet but full of life, and in that stillness, Naeli and Sam rested, ready for whatever the next day would bring. The survival of the day had been a test, and together they had passed. The first light of dawn broke over the desert, casting long, pale shadows across the sand and rocks. Naeli awoke to the soft rustling of leaves and the faint chirping of birds. Her body ached from the long, exhausting journey of the previous day, but the cool morning air and the quiet safety of the grove helped her feel stronger. Sam had already risen, checking the small fire and scanning the surrounding area with sharp, experienced eyes. "Morning," he said softly, giving her a nod. "We need to move before the sun climbs too high. The desert can be unforgiving at this hour." Naeli nodded, stretching her stiff limbs. Her throat felt dry, but the previous day's water and food had restored some of her strength. She felt ready to continue, though she knew the day ahead would not be easy. They packed their few supplies carefully, making sure to leave nothing behind that could slow them down. Sam checked his horse, adjusting the saddle and making sure the reins were secure. Naeli followed, collecting herbs along the edges of the grove where small shoots peeked through the soil. Even in the morning light, the desert seemed vast and endless, stretching far beyond what the eye could see. Their path led them through a narrow canyon, the walls rising sharply on either side. The canyon floor was uneven, filled with jagged rocks, loose stones, and small pools of water from last night's dew. Naeli moved carefully, her eyes scanning the ground for hidden obstacles, while Sam led the way, guiding her steps and keeping a watchful eye on the sky above. The canyon, which seemed safe in the early light, suddenly took on a more threatening tone as shadows shifted with the rising sun. As they rounded a bend, they spotted a group of figures in the distance. Sam immediately crouched slightly, signaling Naeli to stay low. The figures were outlaws, rough-looking men on horseback, armed and alert. They were heading in the direction of the canyon, and from the looks of them, they were searching for something. or someone. Nayeli's heart pounded in her chest. She had never seen danger like this before, and fear mixed with adrenaline surged through her. "Stay behind me," Sam whispered, his eyes fixed on the approaching group. "We move slowly. No sudden movements." Nayeli nodded, gripping a small rock in her hand more for comfort than as a weapon. She followed him closely, every step careful, silent, and deliberate. The outlaws were still too far to notice them, but the tension was unbearable. Every rustle of a leaf, every crack of a stone beneath their feet could give them away. They moved along the canyon wall, using the rocks as cover. Sam whispered directions, pointing to crevices and ledges where they could hide if needed. Nayeli followed without hesitation, trusting his judgment completely. She could feel the sweat on her back, the tightness in her legs, but she kept going. Survival required focus, and she could not allow herself to falter now. The outlaws drew closer, their horses' hooves raising small clouds of dust. Sam motioned for Nayeli to stay low behind a large boulder, while he crept slightly forward to get a better view. From this vantage point, he could see the entire group, 5 men armed with pistols and rifles, scanning the canyon for travelers. Sam's mind worked quickly, calculating the best route to avoid them. He knew the canyon floor was risky, but there was a narrow passage along the upper ledges that could lead them safely out of sight. "Follow me carefully," Sam whispered when he returned to Nayeli. "We take the ledge. Step only where I step. One wrong move and we could be seen." Nayeli's heart raced, but she nodded. Her hands trembled slightly, but she forced herself to focus. Together they began the climb, using the rough canyon walls for support. The rocks were hot under the morning sun, and loose stones threatened to slide under their weight, but Sam's steady presence gave her courage. Halfway along the ledge, Nayeli lost her footing on a loose stone. She stumbled, letting out a small gasp. Sam grabbed her arm instantly, pulling her back to safety. "Careful," he said quietly, his eyes scanning the canyon floor. "Don't panic. We're almost there." Nayeli nodded, gripping his arm tightly as they continued. Her fear was intense, but it was balanced by a growing sense of trust and reliance on Sam. She realized that in this moment she could not survive without him, and that knowledge gave her a strange strength. Finally, they reached a safer ledge overlooking the canyon floor. From here, they could see the outlaws moving past below, unaware of their presence. Nayeli sank to the ground, her chest heaving as she caught her breath. Sam crouched beside her, his expression serious but calm. "We made it," he said, "for now. But we can't stop here. We need to keep moving until we're out of their range." Nayeli nodded, feeling a mix of relief and exhaustion. The canyon had tested them both, but they had survived. The bond between them had grown stronger, not through words, but through shared danger and mutual dependence. Nayeli realized that she had trusted him completely, and Sam knew he would do whatever it took to protect her. They continued along the ledge, moving slowly and carefully. The desert below stretched endlessly, a mix of sand, rocks, and distant hills. The sun climbed higher, casting harsh light and long shadows that shifted constantly. The heat was intense, but the ledge offered a small breeze and some relief from the canyon floor's scorching sun. Nayeli's energy was draining again, but she focused on each step, keeping her balance and following Sam's guidance. By mid-morning, they reached a narrow opening leading out of the canyon. The path was steep, and the rocks were loose, but it promised escape from the outlaws below. Sam led the way, carefully testing each foothold, while Nayeli followed, gripping the canyon wall for support. The climb was slow and exhausting, but eventually they reached the top. where the canyon opened into a small valley. The air was fresher here, and a gentle wind offered some relief from the relentless desert heat. They stopped to rest, taking small sips of water and gathering their strength. Nayeli looked around, her eyes wide with awe at the valley's beauty. Green shrubs and small trees dotted the landscape, and a distant stream glimmered in the sunlight. For the first time that morning, she allowed herself to relax, though only slightly. The desert was never truly safe, and she knew they still had a long journey ahead. Sam noticed her moment of calm and smiled faintly. "This valley should be safe for a while," he said. "We can rest, gather some water, and plan our next move." Nayeli nodded, grateful for the reprieve. She knelt by the stream, cupping her hands to drink and feeling the cool water refresh her tired body. The herbs she had come for were near the edge of the valley, and she began to carefully collect them, her hands steady despite her exhaustion. As she worked, Sam kept watch, scanning the horizon for any signs of danger. He knew the desert could surprise them at any moment, and he was prepared. Nayeli glanced up at him, realizing how much she relied on his vigilance and experience. Without him, she might not have survived the canyon, the outlaws, or the harsh desert itself. The thought filled her with gratitude and respect. Hours passed as they rested and prepared for the next stage of their journey. The sun began its slow descent, casting long shadows across the valley. Nayeli felt stronger now, her energy returning after water, food, and rest. She and Sam shared a quiet moment, sitting near the stream and watching the sky turn shades of pink and orange. The desert was beautiful, even in its harshness, and she felt a deep connection to the land and to the man who had helped her survive it. But even in this calm, there was an unspoken understanding. The desert would not remain peaceful for long. Danger could return at any moment, and their journey was far from over. Nayeli and Sam knew they had to continue, to rely on each other and to face whatever challenges awaited them with courage, trust, and determination. The turning point had come. The canyon, the outlaws, and the relentless desert had tested them both. They had survived, but only together. And in that moment, a bond was formed, one built on trust, survival, and shared determination. Whatever lay ahead, they would face it side by side. The sun had begun its slow descent, turning the desert sky into shades of fiery orange and soft pink. Nayeli and Sam moved cautiously through the valley, aware that danger could return at any moment. They had survived the canyon and outsmarted the outlaws, but the desert was unpredictable, and the day's trials were far from over. The distant hills cast long shadows across the sand, and the wind carried a dry, shifting scent that made both of them tense. "We need to keep moving," Sam said softly, scanning the horizon. "Night will come soon, and we don't want to be caught in the open." Nayeli nodded, her body tired, but her mind alert. She clutched the small bundle of herbs she had collected, her fingers brushing against the soft leaves. Every step forward was measured, careful, and deliberate. The desert beneath their feet was uneven, with loose rocks and hidden dips that could cause a fall if they weren't careful. As they climbed a low ridge, a sudden gust of wind stirred up a cloud of dust, blinding them for a few moments. Nayeli coughed and blinked rapidly, trying to clear her eyes. Sam immediately stepped close, shielding her with his body and guiding her hands to her face. "Easy," he said calmly. "We're safe. Just keep moving with me." She nodded, grateful for his presence, and followed his lead as the dust began to settle. The ridge led them to a small plateau overlooking a dry riverbed below. The land was harsh and unforgiving, with jagged rocks and thorny shrubs scattered across the sand. Nayeli's legs ached, and her energy was low, but she pushed herself forward, knowing that stopping could be dangerous. Sam noticed her struggle and slowed his pace, keeping a steady hand near her shoulder to support her whenever she faltered. Suddenly, a loud noise echoed through the valley, a distant shout followed by the thunder of hooves. Sam's eyes narrowed. "The outlaws," he muttered. "They've found our trail." Naeli's heart leapt into her throat. A fear surged through her body, and she stumbled slightly. But Sam caught her arm immediately. "Stay calm," he whispered. "We can't panic. Follow me exactly." He led her toward a narrow passage between two large boulders, a natural shelter that could hide them from view. The outlaws appeared on the plateau above, their horses kicking up clouds of dust as they searched for the travelers. Sam crouched low, signaling Naeli to do the same. She pressed herself against the rock, her heart pounding as he whispered directions. Every second felt like an hour, and the tension was almost unbearable. One of the outlaws dismounted and began moving closer, scanning the rocks below with a sharp eye. Sam held his breath, and Naeli followed suit, trying not to make a sound. The man paused near the edge of the plateau, his shadow falling across the rocks where they hid. Naeli's stomach twisted in fear. She had never felt danger so close, so immediate in her life. Sam gently pressed his hand against hers, a silent reminder to stay calm and follow his lead. The outlaw moved on, unaware of their presence. Sam let out a quiet breath, signaling Naeli that they could move again. They continued along the narrow passage, careful not to dislodge any stones or make any noise that could give them away. The air was thick with tension, and every rustle of leaves or distant bird call made Naeli flinch. She realized how small and fragile she felt in this vast, unforgiving land. Yet she also felt a growing strength, a determination to survive, to push forward, and to trust Sam completely. As they navigated the rocky terrain, they came to a dry riverbed, wide and open, with only scattered boulders for cover. Sam studied it carefully. "We have to cross," he said quietly. "There's no other way, but we need to move fast and stay low." Naeli nodded, gripping her bundle of herbs tightly. Together, they crouched and began moving across the riverbed, each step calculated and careful. The sun was low now, casting long shadows that stretched across the sand. Halfway across, a branch snapped under Naeli's foot. The sound echoed through the canyon like a gunshot. She froze, her breath catching in her throat. Sam reacted instantly, pushing her low and signaling her to stay still. The outlaws' heads turned toward the sound, their voices carrying through the valley. "Did you hear that?" one of them shouted. Sam whispered a quick plan to Naeli. They would move only when the outlaws were distracted, using the larger boulders as cover. Minutes felt like hours as they waited, pressed against the warm rocks, hearts pounding in unison. Naeli's fingers trembled as she held her herbs, and she could feel the sweat running down her back. She had never been so aware of her own heartbeat, so conscious of every breath and every small movement. Sam's presence beside her was steadying, a calm anchor in the middle of chaos. When the outlaws moved on, unaware of their exact location, Sam led Naeli across the final stretch of the riverbed. Each step was deliberate, low, and careful. Naeli stumbled slightly, but Sam caught her before she could fall. The danger had not passed entirely, but they had made it across without being seen. Relief washed over Naeli, but it was tempered by exhaustion. She sank to the ground briefly, breathing heavily, while Sam kept watch, scanning the horizon for any signs of pursuit. Once they were in a safer area, Sam allowed Naeli to rest properly. They found a small cluster of bushes and rocks that offered partial shade and some cover. Naeli drank water slowly, savoring each sip, and began to feel her strength returning. Sam handed her a small piece of jerky, which she ate quietly. The desert was still harsh, and the journey was not over, but this brief respite gave them both the chance to recover. As they rested, Nayeli realized how close they had come to danger. The outlaws had been near enough to see them if one wrong step had been taken. She shivered at the thought, but also felt a strange pride. They had survived. Together, the trust between them had grown stronger in these moments of fear, exhaustion, and uncertainty. Nayeli looked at Sam, her dark eyes filled with gratitude. He met her gaze and nodded silently, acknowledging their shared struggle and success. But the desert would not give them long to relax. The sun continued its descent, and the temperature began to drop quickly. Nights in the desert were cold and unforgiving, and they needed shelter before darkness fell completely. Sam scanned the landscape and spotted a small overhang in the rocks nearby, a natural formation that could provide some protection from the cold and wind. He helped Nayeli stand, supporting her as they moved toward the shelter. Inside the overhang, they gathered small pieces of wood and dry brush to make a fire. The flames crackled to life, casting warm light and comfort in the small space. Nayeli sat close to the fire, feeling its warmth seep into her tired muscles. Sam kept watch near the entrance, alert to any movement in the distance. The night was quiet, but both of them knew that silence could be deceiving. The desert was alive, full of hidden dangers, and they could not afford to be careless. As the fire burned, Nayeli began to talk quietly, telling Sam about her tribe, the ways they used the herbs she had collected, and the lessons she had learned about the land. Sam listened intently, fascinated by her knowledge and perspective. In turn, he shared small stories about his life as a cowboy, guiding cattle across vast plains and surviving in the harshest conditions. Their conversation was simple, but meaningful, a bridge between two very different worlds. The night deepened, and the stars emerged in the clear desert sky. Nayeli lay close to the fire, her body tired but her spirit renewed. She realized that the day's challenges, the canyon, the outlaws, the harsh sun, had tested her in ways she had never imagined. Yet she had survived, and she had done so with Sam by her side. The bond between them had grown stronger, forged in danger, trust, and shared determination. As sleep began to take her, Nayeli felt a deep sense of peace. The desert was still unpredictable, still full of hidden dangers, but she had learned that courage, careful planning, and trust could carry her through even the most difficult moments. Sam sat near the fire, watching over her, ready to face whatever the desert might throw at them next. They had survived the hardest part of the day, and together, they would continue to face the challenges ahead. The night in the desert was quiet, but full of life. Coyotes howled in the distance, the wind whispered through the rocks, and the stars shone brightly above. Nayeli and Sam rested, knowing that they had overcome the day's greatest dangers. They had faced the desert, the outlaws, and their own fears, and they had survived. Together, they had become stronger, wiser, and more resilient. The journey was far from over, but they had passed the desert's greatest test so far. And in the quiet of the night, with the fire crackling and the stars above, Nayeli and Sam found a moment of calm, a moment to gather strength, reflect on their survival, and prepare for whatever challenges the next day would bring. The first light of morning crept over the desert hills, casting a gentle glow across the rocky landscape. Nayeli stirred slowly, feeling the warmth of the sun on her face and the fading heat of the small fire from the night before. She stretched her tired limbs, feeling both the lingering aches of the past few days and the quiet strength that came from surviving the desert's challenges. Sam was already awake, scanning the horizon, his eyes sharp and alert as always. "Morning," he said softly, giving her a nod. "We have a long day ahead if we want to get back to your tribe before nightfall." Nayeli nodded, rising slowly. Her body felt stronger now after the night's rest, and her mind was clearer. The herbs she had collected were carefully bundled in her hands, a tangible reminder of her purpose and the reason she had ventured into the desert in the first place. They packed their few supplies, making sure nothing was left behind, and checked the small horse Sam had brought with them. The animal had been patient and steady throughout their journey, sensing the tension and urgency of its riders. Nayeli climbed onto the horse carefully, her muscles still stiff but her spirit renewed. Sam mounted beside her, adjusting his saddle and reins with practiced ease. Together they began the descent toward the distant plains that led to Nayeli's tribe. The desert was quiet, save for the occasional rustle of small animals and the soft whistle of the wind. As they traveled, Nayeli glanced around at the vast expanse of sand, rocks, and sparse greenery. She thought of the challenges they had faced: the scorching sun, the treacherous canyon, the outlaws, and the fear that had gripped her in the middle of the riverbed. And yet, despite all of it, she had survived. Not just survived, she had grown stronger, braver, and more resilient. Sam noticed her reflective silence and spoke gently. "You've done well, Nayeli. Most people wouldn't have made it this far alone. You're stronger than you think." Nayeli's lips curved into a small smile. She had always known she had resilience, but hearing it from Sam, someone she had come to trust and respect, made it feel real in a new way. She nodded silently, letting his words settle in her mind. As the day wore on, the landscape gradually shifted. The harsh desert began to soften into rolling hills and patches of grass, signaling that they were nearing the lands where Nayeli's tribe lived. Birds flitted overhead, and the occasional tree offered welcome shade. The air was warmer here, carrying a gentle scent of earth and greenery. Nayeli felt a surge of hope and relief. They were close. The danger of the desert was behind them, or so it seemed. Yet, even as they approached the outskirts of the tribal lands, the desert had one final challenge for them. A sudden storm began to rise in the distance. Dark clouds gathered quickly, and the wind picked up, carrying sand and dust across the plains. Sam's eyes narrowed as he assessed the situation. "We need to move fast," he said urgently. "The storm could be dangerous, especially with loose rocks and rising water in some areas." Nayeli nodded, gripping the horse's reins tightly. She had faced the desert's heat, predators, and outlaws, but now the elements themselves threatened them. They pressed on, the horses' hooves kicking up dust as they navigated the uneven terrain. Nayeli's heart raced, but she trusted Sam's judgment completely. He had guided her through every danger so far, and she knew he would do the same now. The wind howled around them, carrying sand that stung their skin and made it difficult to see. They leaned forward, urging the horse to move steadily, while keeping a careful eye on the path ahead. The storm intensified as they neared a small ravine where water had begun to collect from earlier rainfall. Sam guided the horse carefully along the edge, choosing the safest path and keeping a firm hand on Nayeli's shoulder to steady her. Nayeli's stomach twisted with fear, but she focused on Sam's calm voice and steady movements. Step by step, they crossed the wet, slippery terrain, the water splashing beneath them. One false move could have sent them tumbling, but Sam's skill and careful planning kept them safe. Finally, they reached the edge of the plains, where Nayeli could see the familiar shapes of her tribe's village in the distance. Relief washed over her like a cool breeze. The fear, exhaustion, and tension of the past days began to ease. replaced by gratitude and hope. Sam guided the horse toward a safer path leading directly into the village, ensuring that Nayeli would arrive unharmed. She felt her pulse slow, her body relaxing after the final test of the desert. As they entered the village, Nayeli's people spotted them from a distance. Her family and fellow tribespeople ran forward, calling her name in alarmed and joyous voices. Nayeli slid off the horse, holding her herbs carefully. Her mother rushed to her, enveloping her in a tight embrace. "Nayeli, you're safe." "We feared for you," she exclaimed, tears streaming down her face. Nayeli hugged her mother tightly, feeling a wave of relief and love that made all the hardships of the desert seem worth enduring. Sam dismounted and approached slowly, unsure how he would be received. Nayeli stepped forward and spoke for him. "He saved me," she said simply, gesturing toward Sam. "He guided me through the desert. Without him, I might not have made it." The tribe's people looked at Sam with a mixture of curiosity and gratitude. They were cautious at first, but Nayeli's words and evident respect for him eased their concerns. Her father stepped forward, extending his hand to Sam. "We are thankful for your help," he said solemnly. Sam nodded, a small smile on his face. "It was my honor. She is brave, and she knows the land well. I just helped her along the way." Nayeli watched the exchange quietly, feeling a deep sense of pride in her own resilience and in the bond she had formed with Sam. The village elders invited them to share a meal, and the air was filled with laughter, conversation, and the comforting scent of food cooking over fires. Nayeli felt a sense of belonging and safety that she had longed for during the harsh days in the desert. She shared stories of their journey, carefully omitting moments that might worry her people too much, and spoke of the bravery and guidance Sam had shown. Her tribe listened intently, impressed by both her courage and the wisdom she had gained along the way. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow over the village, Nayeli and Sam sat together near a small fire. The journey had been long, exhausting, and filled with danger, but they had survived. The trust and bond formed between them were undeniable, a connection forged through shared trials and mutual respect. Nayeli felt a deep sense of gratitude, not only for her survival, but for the lessons she had learned about courage, trust, and the strength that could be found in unlikely friendships. Sam looked at her, his expression calm and reflective. "You've grown stronger," he said softly. "Not just because of what you faced, but because of how you faced it." Nayeli nodded, feeling the truth of his words. The desert had tested her, pushed her to her limits, and yet she had endured. She realized that the hardships had shaped her, revealing strengths she had not fully recognized before. The night grew quiet and the stars emerged, twinkling brightly above the desert landscape. Nayeli felt a sense of peace settle over her, a stark contrast to the tension and danger of the past days. She knew that the desert was still vast, unpredictable, and sometimes harsh, but she had survived it, and she had not survived alone. Sam's presence, guidance, and courage had made all the difference. As they rested, Nayeli reflected on the journey, the canyon, the outlaws, the scorching sun, and the cold nights. All of it had tested her in every way. But the trials had also brought lessons: the value of trust, the importance of careful planning, the strength found in perseverance, and the unexpected friendships that could change the course of a life. She realized that survival was not just about skill or strength, but about courage, wisdom, and the willingness to rely on others when needed. In the warmth of the firelight, Nayeli and Sam shared a quiet understanding. Their journey had ended, but the experience would stay with them forever. It had been a test of courage, patience, and resilience, and both had emerged stronger for it. The desert had been harsh, but it had also revealed the best in them. Their bravery, resourcefulness, and the bond formed through shared hardship. As the village settled into the quiet of the night, Naeli felt a deep sense of gratitude. She had returned safely to her people, her purpose fulfilled, and her heart full of respect and admiration for Sam. The journey had been a true test of survival, but it had also been a journey of growth, friendship, and understanding. She knew that she would carry the lessons learned in the desert for the rest of her life. And in that moment, with the stars above, the fire crackling softly, and the quiet of the village around them, Naeli and Sam knew that their story would be remembered, not just as a tale of survival in the Wild West, but as a story of courage, trust, and the unexpected ways that strangers could become allies, and even friends, when the world was at its harshest.